Hey, this is Michelle, and you're listening to Words with Michelle, the podcast, a show where I sit down and have conversations with influencers on a range of topics, anything from natural hair, employment, discrimination, food, relationships, and everything in between. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you want to send me an email, hit me up at michelle@wordsmichelle.com.
Welcome to Words with Michelle. My name is Esther. I'm the host of the Canadian Businesswomen podcast. I had the pleasure of interviewing Michelle on episode 20 of my show, so make sure to check it out after this episode.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of Words with Michelle, the podcast. I'm not going to lie, I'm feeling kind of emotional as this is the last interview for the rest of the year. I'll be taking a short break for the holidays, but I'll be releasing a recap show at the end of the year. To stay up to date with all things Words with Michelle, subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcast. You can also follow me on my socials at Words with Michelle on TikTok, at Words with Michelle on Facebook, and at Words with Michelle on YouTube. You can also follow me on Instagram, and it's at WordsWMichelle. You can also send me an email at michelle@wordswithmichelle.com to be added to my newsletter. I've been so excited to release this episode ever since I sat down with my guests. Today's topic is on a subject that I love to chat about. No, it's not about food, even though I'm a diehard foodie, hashtag Michelle is a foodie. But in this episode, I speak with Sommelier Beverly Crandon, and we speak about all things wine. Although I love wine, I don't consume as much as I did in my pre-pandemic days. So for the past couple of years, or the past 4 years, my wine consumption has completely decreased. But after talking to Beverly, it made me want to reach out and grab a glass of wine. Well, responsibly, of course. As we were approaching the festive season, I thought to share an episode on wine and food pairings, which can help you decide on what to get for your holiday festivities. But before we get into the show, I'd like you to know that this episode is sponsored by Epigram Consulting Services. If you're an entrepreneur or a micro-entrepreneur in need of leveling up your business, Epigram Consulting can walk you through while teaching you the process of starting or expanding a business with their unique business consulting model. Epigram specializes in product identification, business plans, financial analysis, operations, and marketing. Ready to start or fine-tune your business? Contact Karen at info@epigramconsulting.com. Now back to the show. Today's episode isn't only about buying wine for the holidays. I wanted to speak to Beverly Crandon because I really like what she's trying to instill with her knowledge of wine. Beverly is the founder of Spice Food and Wine Group, a series of food and wine tastings that highlight the beauty in diverse cuisines. Beverly's passion is to challenge the perception of wine and believes it should be accessible to all, regardless of background. In addition, Beverly displays her deep love and expertise of wine as an expert on CTV's The Social. So without further ado, let's welcome Beverly to the show. I started off asking Beverly to give us a quick bio and introduce herself. I want to thank you for being on the show. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to speak with us. So if you can just kindly just tell us a bit about yourself, just introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Beverly Crandon. I'm a certified sommelier through the Court of Masters. I'm also a bit of a marketing geek as well. Purchase funnels make me excited, which is really weird to say. I have been studying wine since 2012, but became a certified sommelier.
I wanted to know a bit more about Beverly's interest in wine, so I asked her when she got interested in wine.
Well, it was like back in 2012. I was actually out for dinner with someone, and he was from California, or is from California, and very close to wine country, San Rafael. And it was just he and I, and we were at a steakhouse, and he was like, "We're ordering 2 bottles of wine," and I said, "That seems really exorbitant. There's 2 people, 2 bottles of wine." But he's like, "Nope, nope, because we're having these things. I want you to see how this particular wine goes with these dishes." And then when we go on to have these things, I want you to see how this wine does with those dishes. I'm like, okay, you know best. At that point, I didn't know Chardonnay from Sauvignon Blanc. I was like, whatever, you order. And he guided me through tasting our entire meal with the wines. And it truly was the first time that I took time to understand what was happening in my mouth. And I noticed how the wine transformed the food, and the food also transformed the wine. So I was like, this is bananas. Not only that, obviously, with two people with two bottles of wine, you can't drink it a lot, you know. So the wines had a chance to breathe, and how they evolved over our dinner. I was like, this is crazy. I didn't know this can happen. And that just sent me down a rabbit hole. And that is how I got into wine. And as soon as I did that with him, there was some independent study and then formal study. And then I guess 10 years later, I was like, we should formalize this and become a sommelier.
It was kind of cool that your friend did that because you were able to taste the difference.
Yeah, yeah. And in a non like intimidating setting, it was just he and I. We were in a restaurant, obviously, but
Yeah.
it was just us. I knew him, and so I could be like open and ask like really dumb questions or whatever. And so that I was really lucky to have that be like my first formal wine experience.
So tell me, why did you start the Spice Food Group? Why did that start?
Mm. So that started from when I started to get deeper into my wine studies. Like a lot of times you're tasting in groups or you're tasting in class, and instructors will ask you for your tasting notes, like what are you grabbing on this wine. And they're doing that because, especially with the court of masters, there's a whole blinding piece that you have to go through where you have to determine what grape this could be, where it's from, cool climate, warm climate. So they ask you to provide tasting notes and so forth, because then they know if you're getting it and you're going down the right path, and will you be able to discern what this wine is when you're going through final certification. And I found that when I was sitting in those classes sometimes, because wine is very personal and sensory, and so when you smell something, anything, someone's perfume walks by, it's like, oh, it reminds me of my grandmother. Then you're going to think about where your grandmother lived and growing up. And so when I would smell wine in class, the same thing would happen. I would smell like, oh my gosh, this is reminding me of black cake, or this is reminding me of the tamarind tree, or this is because these are things as a child, like obviously every Christmas and wedding, you had black cake. Going to Guyana for summer times and Christmas times with my parents, like I remember the tamarind tree, I remember like the fresh mango, I remember monkey apple, like I remember those things. And when you're really getting into something and using all of your senses to determine what it is, a lot of those childhood memories come to the forefront. And so I, from time to time, when I got carried away in class, because I was really focused on what I was doing, would bring up some of those childhood scents, or even taste, flavors on the palate. And I had people would be like, what are you talking about? Or I was told, well, you can't really say that when you're going for certification, because they wouldn't know what that is, and then they would fail you. And
Oh,
that's
wow.
ridiculous. And so, of course, wine at times can be intimidating for anybody. And so, in a classroom setting, when you're told, like, you can't do that, you can't say that, it was somewhat, I was slightly embarrassed because I was being called out for that. And then I thought, I mean, I'm someone who's relatively secure in who they are and what they do and pretty confident. But if I felt that way in that setting with wine, like how do other people feel when they're trying to figure out what to buy at the store on the shelves, but they don't want to ask anybody and look foolish, or you're in the restaurant, you don't know what this wine list is, very crazy. Like how do they feel? And so I thought we need to find a way to make it more approachable. How do we make wine more approachable? And how do we do this for as many people as possible? So we started off doing like small dinners where we'd go to a restaurant and be like, hey, what's your least busy day? And we'd be like, can we have that evening, a Monday evening, Tuesday evening? And it'd be a restaurant where the cuisine is one that you would not read about being paired with wine. So we did like Ethiopian, Mexican, Thai, Haitian, all of it. And we would accommodate anywhere between 20 to 30 people, and we do a 5-course pairing for them with the food and the wine, so they can see how well our foods go with these wines and how approachable wine can be. And it does help when you see someone of color kind of talking to you about those wines, that you kind of resonate and can relate to the person. Um, and then We were like, well, how do we hit more people? Because in addition to like our base who were people of color, we wanted to show all Canadians this experience. Because some would never think, maybe I should try Haitian food. I might like it, and maybe I can pair it with wine. And I had people come to our events and say that exact same thing. Like I never knew Haitian food tastes like that, and I never knew it could pair with wine. So that's how the festival started. Because we're like, how can we touch as many people as possible at one
Okay.
time? And that's how Spring in the Spice started. So Spring in the Spice is now up to almost 2,000 people that come through. We've got a bunch of food vendors. All the entire world is represented. For lack of a better term, ethnic cuisines. I'm trying to find a new term for that. Are all represented there. And you walk around and you taste food from the food vendors, and there's a bunch of wine kiosks there. So you kind of choose your own adventure, you pair your wines with it, and it's whatever you choose to pay, right? Like if you want to have 10 dishes that day, then you're going to have 10 dishes that day, and that's what you're going to pay for, or 2 dishes or whatever. But you get to choose your own adventure. So it was all about trying to make wine more approachable and hitting as many people as possible with that message.
So did the food and wine group, did it start off as the festival and the festival
No, it
came
started
forth?
off as just doing those little dinners.
Oh, okay. And then okay.
Yeah. And then the thing is, like those dinners, because you're taking over a restaurant, you got to pay for staff, you got to pay for their food, you got to pay for the overhead. Those dinners would range from like $130 a person to maybe $200 a person. And that's not approachable, and that's not in everybody's range. Whereas the festival, where your entry is $20 and you get to choose what you want to spend the rest of the day and what you want to eat, now we can touch more people. So that's why the festival is in existence.
So what is Vinequity? Is it
Yeah, yeah. So Vin Equity is a Canadian not-for-profit, um, founded by 7 women of color who are all in the wine industry in some capacity, wine and hospitality in some capacity. And it was formed after the reckoning when George Floyd was murdered. We were like, well, what can we do to contribute um, to what's going on? Like, how do we turn this into a positive, if you could say that?
yeah.
And so we thought, well, let's see if we can't tackle the wine industry in terms of having a more diverse wine industry, having more cognitive diversity in this industry. And so Vinequity supports BIPOC people across Canada who are wanting to get into wine or any spirits or any alcoholized beverage industry within Canada. And we support them through scholarships, mentorships, advocacy, different boot camps, wine boot camps, where you go away for 5 days. It's an immersive boot camp, all kinds of things. Our goal is, 10 years from now, that when we go to like wine association events and dinners, that room represents Canada. That
Mm.
room represents Ontario, where the most amount of wines are sold. It has to represent the people. And right now the room does not represent the people. Um, and which is why, like, I think the last poll in terms of market share, wine was the only category in Canada that lost market share. And it lost market share and brought it back to the point of 2010, 2011. It was that bad. But again, you can't have people making decisions on marketing, on
Mm.
flavor profiles, go to market strategies, who do not understand the people and who they want the people with the purchasing power.
Yeah.
Stats Can, not even me making up the stats. Stats Can says that by 2030, the lion's share of revenue earners are going to be people of color or second generation immigrants. 2030. So if you look at our population and you look at these stats, and if you're not making changes about who's sitting at the table and making decisions, that's problematic. That's why you're losing market share. Anyways, the whole point of inequity is to support people who normally wouldn't have a voice or space to get into those industries or the funding to do so, because wine study is not cheap. You're paying for your classes, and then you have to do independent study at home. So you have to buy wines, and that's not cheap. It's expensive. So people will be like, oh, the class is only $500. I'm like, yes, and then you're going to spend $3,000 on wines. So it's expensive.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. That is really good to know. Okay, thanks for sharing that. Okay.
I know it was very long-winded, but yes.
No, because you know what? You don't realize actually the fact that you just said you have to buy wine. I don't know. I didn't think about that because for some reason you think it's supplied. I don't know. I didn't like I dive into it, so I didn't realize. But if you use 3 grand, I guess it's over. How long is a course? How long is the sommelier course?
Well, it depends on what level you're at in your coursing.
Mhm.
And yes, while you're in class, the instructor will supply wine, so you're doing tasting in class. But in order for you to really hone your palate and
Mm,
understand the geo, understand the appellation, you have to do independent study. You have to read up on that appellation when you get home. And it's even better if you have wines from that appellation, you can kind of compare it, or take grapes from different parts of the world, but the same grape, different parts of the world, to understand how this grape shows up in a cool climate, this grape shows up in a warm climate, this grape shows up in a moderate climate. So it does cost a lot of money. And then the more advanced you get, the more expensive it gets.
okay.
So yeah.
Oh, that is so interesting. Oh my gosh, awesome. How did you feel being a Black female in this space?
Uh what I found surprising, again, because I walk through life like I should be here. I don't, but there were encounters in the wine world where I was like, wow, I didn't even know that people actually thought like that. Where people would go on social media and they would make comments on other people's posts about, it's not us who needs to learn about your flavors and your cuisine. Why can't you learn ours? And this is coming from who people would call an industry pundit, someone who's a wine writer, been in the industry for a long time, writing for major publications, major player in the scene, and one of the old guard. Wrote that on social media on someone else's post. So seeing that, first I was like, whoa, geez, that's how you really think? And then B, he's okay with it because he put it on social for everybody to see. So that's just an example of some of the stuff you hear people say, and I'm like, oh. Or mistaking me for another Black female who's in wine. I'm like, we look nothing alike. That guy, come on now. So there's some of those things. Oh, we have Black friends, our neighbors are Black. You encounter those things, and
Oh, okay.
that shows me that people are saying they're trying to relate to you, but they're uncomfortable. They haven't done it in the past before. They don't know how to go about it, and that's just the industry. That's just some of the people in the industry, and that's why the whole thing around cognitive diversity and making scenarios so that actually happens with like proven equity is so important. Now, with that being said, there are people who consciously try, but the fact that they have to consciously try shows that there's a problem. You know what I mean? It's not, yeah, there's a problem. Yeah, I mean, I won't go into more specifics about specific situations, but it is definitely there and it's definitely noticed. Um, and I will say that there's only once in my wine life where I walked into a room and I felt very like self-conscious, like being the only person of color there. It was, and it's very cliquey and everybody kind of knows, so it's when you're new and, don't look like the rest of people in the room, it does make it a little more difficult to do. What fuels me is the consumer interaction that I have when I can show someone that wine is not pretentious. I can do these dinners. I can talk to people at the festival, go through wine experiences with them. Like that is what fuels me, and that's what makes me happy. Also, I mean, the biggest thing, I won't say the biggest things. One of the things with the festival, I remember I was saying to you, it's great that our base is coming out, people of color to our dinners, but now I want everybody in Canada to experience this because I
Mhm.
find food and wine is one thing that can bridge the gap and bring people together and learn that there's more sameness than there are differences. Like if you take a look at the Caribbean cuisine and take a look at like British cuisine from days of old, like you will find that there's some crossover. And there's crossover because of colonization. Like there are some things that we eat that they eat. There's some things that they brought because that's what they did in Britain, and they brought it to the Caribbean. And we kind of made it a bit of our own with our own spices and whatnot, or found ways to preserve it because we didn't have the industrial goods like they had. So we had to put it on the ground and try to find a way to make it work. So we morph some of the dishes. That's what I'm saying. There's more sameness and differences when it comes to food and wine. And with Spring in the Spice, it truly is bringing all of Canada or all of Ontario together and having people do these tastings and having people like shoulder to shoulder, different cultures, different races, different ages, different sexes. That's the beauty of it. And that is one of the large drivers of the Spring in the Spice Festival. So when I go into a room and I don't feel comfortable, or when I see some old Caucasian man write foolishness on social media, it does bother me. But
Mhm.
then I remember that bringing cultures together and bringing people together far greater of a feeling and of a passion, of an emotion than that fool who wrote something on social media. So
Yeah. How long ago was that though? When did that happen?
the social media foolishness.
Yeah, was that a while ago? I hope it was a
No
while
man,
ago. That's what
no man, no, no.
you told me
I
it
was
wasn't okay, was it within the past 4
maybe
years?
2 years ago. Maybe 2 years
Oh,
ago. Yeah,
oh, okay.
pretty recent.
So
Yep,
yeah, I'm
yep,
I'm I'm
yep.
shocked. I'm
Yeah,
shocked.
some people are like, oh, when they mention his name, because again, he's old guard and a lot of people know him and respect him in the industry.
Mhm.
So and so and so and so. You should really talk to him, Beverly. I'm like, no, I'm not ready to talk to him. And I explain why. Oh, well, he doesn't really know it. Don't make excuses. Like, I can't. I can't. So,
Yeah. I mean, I guess stuff like that will always bother me because I'm like, we live in Canada and I'm based in Toronto. I believe you're based in Toronto. And we just see how it's such a diverse, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like there's so many different, we all eat different foods. I mean, like I eat foods from every culture and I don't think that it's such an issue to bring in new food, you know what I mean? Or to them new, but our food,
yeah,
I don't think, but that's
yeah.
beside. But well, thank you for sharing that with me. Because Beverly does pairings with wine and foods from different cultures, I had to ask her about a wine to pair with one of the staples in my household. Check out what that is. Okay, so I'm from Trinidad, and I was born here, but my background is from Trinidad. What would you pair with roti? What would be a great wine for roti?
Yeah. So it would depend. Now here's
Mhm.
the nerd. It would depend on if you had so if you have it in the roti skin or if you're having curry with just plain rice. And I'm gonna give people both options.
Okay, great.
Um, so if it's in the roti skin, I'm looking for a wine for its structure. That's my primary thing. Meaning I'm looking for something with great acidity because the you need something to break down that roti skin, right? Because that's like it's dough, it's bready. You have to break that down. And the best way to do that is to get a wine that's got great acidity on it.
Mhm.
What that will do is it will turn that roti skin like into like creaminess, like a great texture in the palate, in the mouth. And then you're gonna want to find something that's got a bit of a ripeness to it, not sweet, but has a grape that carries like a nice, bright, ripe fruit. So
Mhm.
I would do things like a Gruner Veltliner with curry easily. I would do things like an Alto Adige Pinot Grigio, a well-made one. I would do things like uh, West Sonoma Coast Chardonnay. There's a couple of things if you understand the acidity is going to be there. Now, if you don't have the roti skin, you've got more room to play. Without the roti skin, my lead is going to come from like the curry flavor, the thyme, the nutmeg, the allspice, the clove, because that's going to be the strongest thing. It's not the texture of the meat will come next. It's not the meat that's in there, whatever you're using. It's the flavor of the curry. Now you've got more options as far as I'm concerned. And you could even do something like a slightly chilled oaked Cabernet Sauvignon from South Africa because I have done that in the past. And why that would work is the thyme, the clove, the allspice in curry are also flavors that oak imparts into wine. So now you're doing like a same matching, and that works wonderfully on the palate.
Honestly, you had me because it's just like, first of all, I'm a foodie too. Like, I mean, I'm a podcaster, but I'm a huge foodie. So just the fact that you broke all that down is really good for me. I love it. It was interesting because like I said, I never really thought about pairings. I mean, yes, I know that it's a
Mm.
thing that you pair certain wines with certain foods, but you actually broke it down to like the spice that's in the curry, and then also breaking down the roti. Like I never even thought of that, you know.
100%.
And then
You know,
you wines that I don't even know. Like I will say that some of them I don't even know. Like I have no idea what they are. So I'm gonna do some investigation on some of those wines.
Yeah, it's really funny. Like, I don't know, maybe tonight if you have something to eat, well, hopefully you're having dinner, and
Yeah.
then you have wine with it. If you just stopped, chewed, dissected, you'd be like, oh yeah, this is stronger than that, or that texture is stronger than the flavor. And then you have the one like you just learn so much. But as humans, we like a lot of times because we're so busy, we just kind of woof things down and don't have the time to sit back and think about that. But I've made it a conscious thing. Whatever I put in my mouth, I'm like, oh, what's the breakdown or the texture? Like even like a cup of tea, I'm like, oh, it's okay. They said it was everything, so I can understand and be able to pick up flavors.
Nice, nice, nice. So I just wanted to ask, so what would be some of your faves? Some of your like say like mid-level or mid-priced, I mean, faves for wine, like either red, white, or champagne.
I will say this. Let's talk because we're coming into the holiday season. Let's talk about champagne. There are a lot of people who will go and buy Moet, will go like the ones that they know the names, right? And then the big bottles, and sometimes they put little rhinestones to make it even more appealing. Um, Pro tip: there are growers who grow grapes in Champagne, region of Champagne, who sell their grapes to those big houses, and they sell them the grapes that they don't want to use for their own wines. So they sell, like here's the second rate ones. Here, you take those. And then the grower producer creates their own champagne and it comes into the market a fraction of the price of the Veuves and the Moets and the blah. To me, when someone pulls that out and tries to pour that for me, I'm like, I mean, I'm not going to be rude, I'll drink it, but I'm like, there's so much more you could be purchasing instead of purchasing that thing. So that's one. So I will look for grower champagne, kind of understand who they are, who they sell their grapes to. Then I get a providence. Okay, I see what's going on. Then the other thing I will say around sparkling wine, you don't always have to be drinking champagne for special occasions. I would look to, and I do a lot of cremants. So cremant is in France just represents that it's going to be a sparkling wine made in the same fashion as champagne, sorry, in the traditional method. So you've got some inclination. Okay, I get it. So it's made traditional method. If it's a cremant, I will do Cremant d'Alsace, Cremant de Jura, especially Cremant de Jura because I'm a big fan of Blanc de Blanc champagne. So champagne's made just only with Chardonnay and no other grapes. And Cremant de Jura is generally going to be that. But those cremants, you can find them for under $30 and they're delicious, a great acidity, great structure, wonderful, wonderful sparkling wines. So that's my pro tip. That's like I don't need to spend $100 on the Moets and the Veuves because I'm not getting value for my money at all.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. Wow. For me, I really like that because I do like champagne. And you think that these bigger names are going to be better, but you really broke that down.
Mhm.
I love this convo. Made me think about some wines I'd like to try, but I love her pro tip about some of the fancy champagnes. Before I end the show, I asked Beverly to provide some info about her upcoming events. Okay, so can you please let us know what upcoming projects you have or anything on the
Yeah.
go that you wanted to talk about?
Immediately, it'll be announced probably next week or the week after is our Black Grapes event, which is we're going into our third year. Black Grapes happens Black History Month. It's where we bring wines that are made by Black people, where the grapes were grown by Black people, where the wines are brought into the country by an agency that's fully or partially owned by a Black person. And then there's arts and all kinds of things that are in there too. So it's another walk around tasting where you get to try these wines and celebrate Black voices in wine. And then we also coordinate and work with local Black owned restaurants. So that's called Black Grapes, and that is February 20th. So announcements will be coming up for that soon.
Okay, great. I'm glad you told me that. I want to go to that. So that's gonna be in Toronto, right?
Yes.
Okay, so good. So please keep me abreast on that. I would love to be a part of that. Like, I want to be a guest
Yeah.
or I want to attend it. Can you please give us your information, your contact information, so we can contact you if we have any questions or just check
Yeah.
out your what you do.
Absolutely. So the website, super simple, beverlycrandon.com, very easy. You can go there. And my Instagram is also just Beverly Crandon, one word.
Okay, great. This was amazing talking to you. Like, as you can tell, I'm excited. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and talk about wine, all things wine. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for speaking and including me in your program.
Thanks again for listening to the latest episode of Words with Michelle, the podcast. Just a reminder, you can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also listen to the show on my blog at wordswithmichelle.com. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to provide a comment or feedback, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me at michelle@wordswithmichelle.com. You can also email me if you're interested in sponsoring an episode. Thanks again for listening to the show, and until next time, bye.